The jungle was silent, unnervingly so, as Juan Maldonado stumbled back to the ancient ruins. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his heart pounded with the weight of the nightmare he had just witnessed. The stone basin loomed ahead, its dark waters once shimmering with the promise of eternal life, now swirling with something far more sinister. His hands trembled as he reached the edge of the basin, his reflection wavering in the murky depths. The men, his men, were gone, reduced to nothing but ash and bone, their screams still echoing in his mind. The air around him was thick, oppressive, as if the jungle itself was watching, waiting. The voices of the dead whispered in the leaves, faint but unmistakable. They called his name, their tones a haunting mix of pleading and accusation. They wanted him to drink, to take the same cursed step they had, to join them in their eternal agony. But Maldonado knew now. He knew the truth hidden in the map, the secret buried beneath the centuries. This was not the fountain of youth. It was something much darker, an ancient trap waiting for the greedy, the desperate, the foolish. His hand hovered above the water, the urge to drink warring with the terror that gripped his soul. In the distance something stirred, a shadow that wasn't there before. The jungle seemed to shift, closing in on him, and in that moment Maldonado realized that the end was near. Not just for him, but for anyone who dared follow in his footsteps. He took one last look at the basin, knowing it would be the last thing he ever saw, and whispered the words he had written in his journal hours before. It was never meant for us. This is a forgotten tale of the Maldonado Papers and the Enigma of the Fountain of Youth that happened in the 1500s. The quest for the legendary Fountain of Youth has long been a tantalizing myth for explorers. Stories of waters that could restore vitality and grant immortality have been told by indigenous peoples and whispered among the Spanish conquistadors as they ventured into the New World. Juan Ponce de Leon may be the most famous name associated with the myth, but he was far from the only one consumed by its allure. Another lesser-known yet far more mysterious figure was Juan Maldonado, a man whose pursuit of eternal life would lead to one of the darkest, most forgotten episodes of exploration in the 1500s. The legend of Maldonado and his doomed expedition was all but lost to time until the early 1900s, when a series of weathered documents known as the Maldonado Papers surfaced in Spain. These papers, purported to be the journals of Juan Maldonado himself, offer a chilling account of his journey into the heart of the jungle and his horrifying discovery of something far worse than death. What follows is the story that unfolded in those pages, a forgotten tale of ambition, terror, and a mystery that still lingers in the darkest corners of history. The legend of the Fountain of Youth can be traced back to the indigenous tribes of the Caribbean, who spoke of a magical spring or river whose waters could reverse aging. This story reached the ears of the Spanish explorers, who were already dreaming of wealth, glory, and conquests in the New World. The fountain, if it existed, would grant something more valuable than gold, eternal life. While Ponce de Leon's failed expedition to Florida in 1513 is the most famous attempt to find the fountain others would follow, lured by the possibility of uncovering this miraculous source. One such man was Juan Maldonado, a relatively unknown figure in the annals of Spanish conquest. But in his time, Maldonado was driven by an obsession even deeper than the quest for riches. He sought to defy death itself. The Maldonado Papers were found in an old estate in Spain, tucked away in a chest of forgotten relics. When they were discovered by a historian, their authenticity was initially questioned. The faded ink and deteriorated pages seemed to belong to the 16th century, but their contents were stranger than anyone could have anticipated. The documents included personal journals, letters, and crude maps drawn by Maldonado during his travels. They described an expedition that began in the late 1500s, sent by a powerful nobleman obsessed with finding the Fountain of Youth. Maldonado's writings indicate that he had come into possession of a map, said to be from an ancient source, leading to a remote area deep within the jungles of Central America, far from the coastal regions previously explored. Maldonado's expedition set sail with 3 ships carrying several dozen men and a handful of priests. His papers detail their journey, describing the hardships they faced as they navigated treacherous seas and the uncharted jungle. For months, they trekked through dense forests, battling tropical diseases, wild animals, and hostile terrain. Men began to desert the expedition, their spirits broken by the brutal conditions. Maldonado, however, was relentless. His writings reveal a man consumed by his obsession, fixated on the map and the promise it held. As his crew grew weaker, he became more determined. The map seemed to pull him forward, its lines etched into his mind like a curse. He wrote of strange dreams that plagued him, dreams of an ancient civilization, of waters that shimmered with an otherworldly glow, and of a figure watching him from the shadows. The deeper they went into the jungle, the more ominous the atmosphere became. Maldonado's men began to report sightings of strange figures watching them from the trees, always at the edge of their vision. Some heard voices whispering in languages they did not understand, while others claimed to feel a presence lurking just beyond the firelight at night. Despite these eerie occurrences, Maldonado pressed on. He was convinced they were close to something far greater than any treasure. After weeks of grueling travel, Maldonado's expedition reached a clearing deep within the jungle. What they found there defied explanation. The clearing was dominated by the crumbling remains of an ancient city, overgrown with vines and moss. At its center stood a massive stone basin, filled with water that gleamed unnaturally in the midday sun. Maldonado's journal entries from this point are filled with a sense of triumph. He was convinced that this was the Fountain of Youth, the legendary source of eternal life. He described the water in the basin as crystal clear, yet somehow darker than the deepest ocean. It seemed to shimmer with an inner light, drawing him toward it. But as the men gathered around the basin, eager to drink from its waters, something strange began to happen. Maldonado noted that the air around them seemed to thicken, growing heavier with each passing moment. The jungle, which had been alive with the sounds of birds and insects, fell silent. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with an energy that was both ancient and malevolent. One of Maldonado's men was the first to reach the basin. He dipped his hand into the water, and as he did, his skin seemed to rejuvenate before their eyes. The others, overcome with excitement, rushed forward to drink, but their triumph quickly turned to terror. Maldonado's journal describes the horrific transformation that followed. The men who drank from the basin began to scream in agony as their bodies convulsed violently. Their skin, which had momentarily appeared youthful, began to wither and decay at an accelerated rate. Within minutes, they were reduced to skeletal husks, their bodies collapsing into dust as their screams echoed through the jungle. Maldonado, horrified by what he had witnessed, fled the clearing. He described feeling as though the jungle was alive, as though it were hunting him. The whispers of his dead men followed him wherever he went, their voices growing louder, more insistent. They called out to him, begging him to return to the basin, to drink the water that had claimed their lives. The final pages of the Maldonado Papers are disjointed and erratic, filled with scribbled warnings and fragmented thoughts. Maldonado wrote of being pursued by something unseen, something that lurked in the shadows of the jungle. He knew that he was doomed, but he could not stop himself from returning to the basin. The last entry in the Maldonado Papers is chillingly brief. Maldonado wrote that he had returned to the basin, drawn by a force he could not explain. As he stared into the dark waters, he understood the truth. This was not the Fountain of Youth, it was something far older, far darker. It had never been meant for mankind. His final words, scrawled in desperation, read, "It was never meant for us."